My presentation is going to be very quick. I'm going to start by saying that freedom of information is a collective responsibility, meaning all of us share this burden. Secondly, the state plays the major role in either nurturing it or destroying it. Whether freedom of information is opened up or whether it's shut down is very much dependent on who holds the levers of power in the state and whether they exercise the levers of power democratically or in authoritarian fashion. Now, most state systems, especially authoritarian systems, try their best to restrict freedom of information. And sometimes it's one step forwards, two steps backwards, because there are very, very subtle ways of controlling, of restricting freedom of information. And authoritarian governments do it because they fear information, because they do not want to be accountable, so that the policies and activities they engage in are hidden from public view and remain secret. And this is a means of manipulating, of controlling the public and ensuring the continuation of their regime. And together with it, of course, the control of the regime of the state is accompanied by the looting of the state treasury and other resources and the illicit accumulation of wealth, of power and of privilege. So, freedom of information is very important in undermining authoritarian governments. Now, we can argue that Malaysia is not in the list of authoritarian governments. Maybe what we have here is a semi or quasi-authoritarian government. But in terms of our freedom of information, in terms of the public access to public information, official information and records, we are worse off than many authoritarian states in the world. And that's a fact. Now, we should not be in this position because we have a constitution which, although it does not explicitly specify the freedom of information in it, it makes it very clear that we enjoy, in Part 2 of our Constitution, key fundamental rights and liberties. Article 10.1 guarantees the freedom of speech, the right to assemble peacefully, and the right to form associations to every Malaysian citizen. Now, the right to speech has been argued by the government and its supporters to say that this does not mean the right to information. And I'll be a little bit impolite, I'll say bullshit. In fact, the two freedoms, freedom of speech and expression, and freedom of information go hand in hand. Our fundamental right to speech, which is one of our basic liberties, our basic freedoms, can be effectuated only if we, that is all citizens, have the effective right to access information available with the government, from the government. Now, in this respect, the Selangor State Government's initiative in initiating FOI Act is highly commendable. It will help push the process of democratization forward in an important way, as well as help reduce the corruption and abuse of public funds and reduce the cost of business. Now, in crafting the FOI, and this is not an easy job, there are 4 key elements that will determine the strength and effectiveness of the FOI, because there can be weak FOIs, there can be strong FOIs. There can be FOIs that are liberal, and there can be those that are less liberal. Now, these four criteria are the width of application of the Act, that is, the nature of organizations and institutions which it should apply to and which it should not apply to. Does the FOI apply, for example, to cabinet proceedings? Yes or no? That's important to determine. Does it apply to records, police records, on May the 13th? Yes or no? Does it apply to records on Hindra? Yes or no? Now, the second key element is the range and kind of information that can be accessed and the kinds of information that can be exempted from disclosure. Who did the police list as the perpetrators for the violence of May the 13th, for example? And how was this filtered out by different committees? The third important dimension, element, is the independence of the institutions that are set up to adjudicate disputes between the citizen and the state on issues of FOI. Now, these institutions that are set up must be independent. If they are not independent, if they are of the government's choosing, if they are part of the government, then it's a bad FOI. The last important dimension, element, is the sanctions in the law against willful and nullified refusal to disclose information or against incorrect disclosure of information, which is what we get a great deal of the time in Malaysia. So these are the four important elements that we need to look at, and I hope they can be crafted into the state FOI very carefully. Now, the state FOI by itself is not sufficient. It needs to be supplemented by a similar act at the federal level, as well as by similar FOI acts in the other states. Only in this way will we secure the right of all Malaysians to information, public information. Only then can we bring about a higher degree of accountability and transparency in the functioning of government and government agencies. Now, I'm running out of time. Let me end very quickly by nitpicking on the draft FOI that I've seen. And there has been an exchange of emails. Firstly, the draft is too long. It's too complex. And I think the authors, those involved in the drafting, may be well served by examining the laws in other countries, notably in India. Now, the Indian case with the FOI, their parliament passed it in 2002 December, is interesting, it's important and instructive. This Act of Parliament in India in 2002 was preceded by various states passing state right to information legislation. And now what's very interesting from the Indian experience is that some of the state FOIs were liberal and some were very weak and very watered down. And what this means is that because Selangor is setting the pace, it is very important for Selangor to craft a strong and liberal and as watertight as possible an FOI. There is a key issue which has emerged in India in relation to the issue of exemptions of the kind of information and reasons for which information can be exempt from disclosure. And this is a little bit lengthy, but I will read it out because these are likely to be the excuses used by the federal government, used by protectors of the status quo, used by the civil servants to push back the right to information.